squeaky shoes. Have you grabbed the squeaky shoes? About to start. Thank you. Bye.
Where does she come in at?
Good afternoon. I'm Maricopa County Attorney Rachel Mitchell, and I want to start off by talking about when I took office on April the 20th of this year. I swore to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution and laws of the state of Arizona. I did that with my hand placed on the Bibles of my parents. They taught me that it is important And my life mission has been how important it is to do the right thing, even when the right thing is not easy. Today is not an easy day. On January the 2nd, 2021, at approximately 9:22 in the evening, Chandler police officer Chase Bebeck Miller observed Anthony Cano riding his bicycle just south of Gazelle Meadows Park in Chandler. As Officer Bebeck Miller got closer, he saw that Anthony was swerving all over the road, and that included crossing over the center line. Concerned with his erratic bike riding, Officer Bebeck Miller activated his emergency lights to initiate a traffic stop. Once he activated his emergency lights, Anthony looked back and began to pedal faster. Anthony then rode along the railroad tracks west of Gazelle Meadows Park, and Officer Bebeck Miller followed behind in his vehicle. Anthony eventually abandoned his bicycle and began to run, jumping over an iron fence into the park. Officer Bebeck Miller stopped his vehicle and he ran after Anthony. He yelled for him to stop. As they were running through the park, Officer Bebeck Miller noticed that Anthony had his right hand in his front waistband the entire time. This was concerning to the officer, and he feared that Anthony was in possession of a gun. After passing through and around some playground equipment, Anthony tripped, and as he fell, he braced himself with only his left arm, while keeping his right arm near his waistband. When he fell, he dropped a gun. He quickly picked up the gun, and review of the body-worn camera at that moment shows that Anthony appears to turn back toward Officer Bebeck Miller with his gun in his right hand. Fearing for his life, Officer Bebeck Miller shot Anthony twice. It was later discovered that the gun in Anthony's possession was a Glock 9mm semi-automatic handgun with an extended magazine that was fully loaded with more than 30 rounds. I have reviewed the body-worn camera many times, and I can understand why people would question the reasonableness of the second shot. In reviewing Officer Bebeck's statements, he stated he did not realize that the gun had been tossed aside before he fired that second shot. And given everything that was happening, it's not surprising or unreasonable that Officer Bebeck Miller did not realize that the gun was no longer in Anthony Cano's hand. Even when he did realize it, the officer described his continuing fear that Anthony still had a weapon. Officer Bebeck Miller's behavior supports this statement because after firing twice, he repositioned himself to the left, further away from Anthony's right hand, which had been holding the gun. This is what officers are trained to do when they are facing a shooter. In fact, both shots occurred in approximately 2 seconds. As county attorney, I must make difficult decisions, and I do not take this responsibility lightly. Parents lost their son. Family lost a family member. And a young man lost his life. But it is my job to decide whether criminal charges can be pursued. And that requires me to determine whether charges can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt to a unanimous jury. As with every critical incident, which includes all officer-involved shootings, the investigative agency, in this case the Chandler Police Department, conducted a full investigation into what occurred the night of January the 2nd. That investigation, including all reports and body-worn camera video, was provided to the Maricopa County Attorney's Office for review to determine whether charges are warranted. The complete investigation was carefully reviewed by me, in addition to members of our Critical Incident Review Committee. This committee includes numerous senior prosecutors from this office, as well as community members who provide a different, non-prosecutorial perspective of the evidence. After reviewing the materials, the committee and I met and discussed the facts, the evidence, and the law. They then made a recommendation to me regarding whether there was a reasonable likelihood of conviction for a crime. Their consideration and mine included an analysis of relevant case law and statutes. One particularly important standard is outlined in the 1989 Supreme Court decision Graham versus Connor. It provides guidance on whether police use of lethal force is reasonable based on 3 factors. 1, whether the suspect poses an immediate threat to the safety of the officer or others. 2, whether the suspect is actively resisting arrest or attempting to evade arrest by flight. And 3, the severity of the crime at issue. On the night of January 2nd, 2 of these 3 thresholds was met. Our own state statutes say that police officers are justified in using deadly force when an officer reasonably believes that it is necessary to defend themselves or a third person from imminent danger. In cases such as this, it's common to review videos multiple times, playing them in slow motion, playing them frame by frame. But in Graham versus Connor, the United States Supreme Court instructs us that the reasonableness of a particular use of force must be judged from the perspective of a reasonable officer on the scene rather than with the 20/20 vision of hindsight. The court stated, the calculus of reasonableness must embody allowance for the fact that police officers are often forced to make split-second decisions in circumstances that are tense, uncertain, and rapidly evolving about the amount of force that is necessary in a particular situation. As a prosecutor, one of the most challenging and yet the most important things I must do is set aside my feelings and focus on the facts and the evidence and the law. The death of this 17-year-old young man is heartbreaking. I want his family to know that I acknowledge and I recognize the terrible loss that they have suffered. But after an analysis of all of these factors, I have determined that the actions of Officer Beback Miller did not violate criminal statutes, and this office will not be filing criminal charges in this matter. And with that, I'll take your questions.
Lucelia Caballero with ABC 15. So question on that video, because I've reviewed that video that was released, and in no point do I not see a clear toss of that gun, and a barrel was not pointed at Officer Beback Miller. So can you defend that statement or tell me where you see the gun either pointed at the officer or where there is definite intent? Because obviously we can't speculate on Cano's intent. He's dead. So can you defend that statement for me?
Sure. In looking at that body-worn camera, as I have reviewed many times as well, when he picks the gun up off the ground and it is in his right hand, it is within a split second of being able to be aimed at and fired upon that officer. We know how quickly things can happen with firearms. When the gun is tossed, the officer says he does not see that the gun is tossed. It is 9:22 in the evening. He is focused, as we know, officers focus on the individual. And based on his behavior afterwards, the evidence shows that he was still under the belief that he was in danger of being fired upon because of the way he moved. Also, if you look at Anthony's hand immediately as he goes down, it is not fully visible so that you can see what is and what is not in that hand.
So again, there was a lot of discussion about that second shot.
Yes.
And again, that's kind of what you touched on, but that's kind of the crux of it. But the feeling from the officer and from your review is that he made that second shot because he felt like he was still a threat.
Yeah. And I agree with you. That second shot is hard to watch. But based on his explanation of it, that he thought that he was still in imminent danger, that is the crux of the decision, is whether a reasonable person in that position would feel that way. That is what the law says. So yes, we did take that into account.
And also, obviously over the past couple of years, there's been a lot of public discussion about excessive force cases involving police. What's your message to the community who, some are going to feel like justice wasn't served here, that they're going to feel like an officer got away with something, that an innocent teenager, a teenager shouldn't have been killed in this situation, that it was excessive. What's your message to the community as far as holding police accountable?
I think it would be unfortunate for any one person to take one case and draw from that conclusions about what will happen to any other case. What I can tell the community is that every single case with its specific facts and specific circumstances will be reviewed independently by this office, and that in appropriate cases we will hold police officers accountable if that's what the law requires, and we will do that.
What is your message to the family right now because they don't think justice is served?
I spoke to Anthony's mother this morning, and obviously there's nothing that I can say that would assuage her grief for losing a son. But what I did try to explain myself, and I wanted her to hear from me because I am the decision maker. This doesn't make it any easier for them to hear this. This was a hard call for her to take, and frankly, it was a hard call for me to make. My heart still goes out to them.
Where's the officer now? Is he in rotation?
Meaning on duty? That's my understanding, yes.
It's been about a year and a half since this shooting happened. Is this a typical amount of time for you guys to make a decision on if you're going to press charges or not?
You know, I can't speak for what was typical under other administrations. What I can say is that when I came into office 5 weeks ago, that I was very aware that I inherited a backlog of officer-involved shooting reviews, and that is a priority for me to get through them so that the answers and our decisions can be imparted to families, can be imparted to officers as well. And so I prioritize that, and that's why we got to this. But I agree that was a very long time to do that, and we have updated our statistics the way they're expressed to the public. And I think when you look at the statistics, which will be updated next week, you will see that we are working away at that backlog, because I think it's very important to do that.
And taking you back to that second shot that was fired, I know you mentioned it was within 2 seconds.
Mhm.
Cano is now lying on the ground.
Yes.
The second shot is fired. Shouldn't officers be held accountable for every bullet they fire?
I think officers we have to look at every bullet that is fired. And what I would want the community to know is those factors that I talked about given us by the United States Supreme Court, I applied to each individual shot in my analysis of this case. And based on the timing and the circumstances and the officer's belief and the positioning of Mr. Cano, Anthony, I believe that we do not have a reasonable likelihood of conviction in that second shot. And I agree, it's hard to watch.
All right, any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.